It's beautiful. I've looked at this for 5 hours now. I'm tearing up, man.
Believe it or not, Valdis Story Abyssal City is the #1 requested game for my channel, even over Hollow Knight. Whether it was in my videos or community posts, people were in the comments asking me to take a look at this game. And so, to be honest, because Valdis Story was so requested, I took my time with this video to ensure I did the game justice. So, for my amazing viewers and listeners, I did my due diligence and actually did a little research on Valdis Story, and wow, is this game old. 2013? Does it even come in color? Don't get me wrong, I've covered much older games on my channel. Some of the Castlevanias, Euphoria the Saga, Wonder Boy, heck, I covered Dust and Elysian Tale, and that was released only a year before Valdis Story. So why does Valdis Story seem so archaic and mysterious compared to other older Metroidvanias? Probably because it's largely been forgotten. It's never received a physical release, it's never been ported to consoles, and nobody talks about it anymore. Which isn't uncommon for a decades-old game, but there's just something unsettling about visiting its wikis, like you're walking into a ghost town. I was scanning one wiki and found 9-year-old comments asking for someone to properly fill it out. It was a very odd and sad time capsule. We can't leave Valdis Story like this. This is a game that should be remembered. That's where this video comes in. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say my video is gonna resurrect the game and motivate Endless Fluff to make a sequel, though how sweet would that be? But I'd like to think that maybe I might be able to introduce a hidden gem to a new generation. Speaking of introductions, what the heck even is Valdis Story? For starters, it's a Kickstarter success story, earning pledges 6 times its asking price of $8 grand. And it was developed by Endless Fluff Games, a 2-person studio. With as much content and creativity this game has, being developed by only 2 people is pretty darn impressive. So, what's the game about? The world of Valdis Story is in shambles. Its goddess has been betrayed and murdered by her own daughter, Mirgato, the goddess of darkness. Valdis' other daughter, Alagath, the goddess of light, declares war against her treacherous sister, and the ensuing battle of angels and demons devastates the land. 40 war-torn years later, we're introduced to our protagonists laying siege on a demon warship. Just as they're about to board the enemy vessel, an enormous sea creature attacks, sending Wyatt and his crew to the ocean's depths. But to Wyatt's surprise, instead of dying, he awakens in a city on the ocean floor. And if he survived, maybe the rest of his crew did too. Determined, Wyatt moves onward in this strange land in search of his missing crewmates. There's a total of 4 playable characters in Valdis Story, each with their own play styles and movesets. Each character also comes with their own quote-unquote campaign, but the plot and the story beats for each character are largely the same, with dialogue being the main differences. Because the similarities between each playthrough is so similar story-wise, I'm going to focus mainly on Wyatt in order to keep this analysis focused. Okay, I think we have introductions out of the way. It's finally time to talk about Valdis Story.
Combat.
Combat's probably Valdis Story's biggest selling point. Its general feel, at least with Wyatt and Karen Cutrena, or were they going for MySpace Scene Girl, is that of Devil May Cry. Absurd combos and ridiculous juggling is back on the menu, boys! The other characters, Vladen and Gilda, play much differently. Vladen can use his arm to do some Dante-type combos, and he's also a marksman with some pew-pews, and he can summon demons. Gilda is far less combo heavy, or at least doesn't cause a spectacle with her combos, and instead opts to use mid-range attacks imbued with status ailments, given you have the MP. If not, the attack will be normal. But Gilda can always just recharge her MP while she summons skeletons to play defense, so that's neat. And that's all I'm going to talk about with the other characters. From this point forward, I'll be approaching everything as if I'm speaking solely about Wyatt. Mainly because I've already outlined their major differences in the previous paragraph, but mainly to keep this analysis focused. Cool? Cool. Oh, one last thing. You can only choose Wyatt and Reyna at first. Vladen and Gilda are unlocked after you beat the game on any difficulty. Oh yeah, this game has difficulty settings if you're interested in that. And that's your basic of the basic combat in a nutshell. You ever play Devil May Cry? Then you know what to expect here. Lots and lots of combos.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
And racking up those hits is what you're going to want to do because, just like Dust, higher combos mean more XP for leveling up. More on leveling in the progression section. Aside from regular and heavy melee attacks, Wyatt and the crew have a bevy of magic at their disposal. Magic's probably the most versatile and influential thing in the entire game. It's used for combat, it's used as utility to progress, and it's an element that affects your soul affinity. We'll dive into soul affinity in the progression section. You equip magic in 4 slots. I played using a PS5 controller, so I bound magic to D-pad directions and will be referring to this controller style moving forward. Anyway, to use magic, you have to hold a trigger and then press the direction of the spell you want to use or cast in the air. I thought this was a really cool setup. This setup made magic fun to use, and it worked well for players who wanted to incorporate magic into their melee combos. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock more magic by collecting souls from defeated bosses. With every soul you collect, you get 4 new spells, 1 for each slot, making a total of 24 spells.
That is one big pile of spells.
The bosses you'll be collecting souls from in this game are no joke. They start out easy enough, but things ramp up to a ludicrous degree by mid to late game, especially if you're underleveled and run into a boss you're not supposed to fight yet, and you're super stubborn and won't accept defeat. For me, this boss's name was Abigail, and she sucked. I found her way too early, and she absolutely stomped the garbage out of me for 30 minutes straight. But I persevered and eventually took her down, and I'm glad I did, because before this fight, I had no idea why anyone would ever like this game. No joke. I was having zero fun with Valdis Story in the beginning. The UI was wonky, the controls were a bit clunky, I hate timed stuff, and this game has a bunch of timed stuff. And I was overwhelmed by all the different crafting shops, menu tabs, and just all the things in the pause screen. There was just so much information at the offset, I got analysis paralysis and thought to myself, is this game even worth it? I'll dive into all that stuff I mentioned in various upcoming sections, but for now, I just want you all to know that Valdis Story's combat saved the game for me. And it was all thanks to Abigail kicking my ass over and over again. You see, my dear viewers and listeners, up until Abigail, I was breezing through the game by only attacking, jumping out of the way of attacks, and blocking with my shield, and thus hadn't experienced what Valdis Story's true combat felt like. Abigail forced me to fight like my life depended on it, and thus forced me to engage in the game's most fun mechanic, the skill cancel. Skill canceling is exactly what it sounds like, but it's also more. If you're in the middle of a combo, you can skill cancel by pressing down on the D-pad. This allows you to stop your combo so you can do another action, like jumping, using magic, or attacking more. Where skill canceling gets interesting is when you press a direction after activating it. This will cause you to dash in that direction, giving your character the all-important iframes. Now that I was utilizing the skill cancel, I was zipping through Abigail's projectiles and dashing toward her while she was vulnerable so I could get in those hits she rightfully deserved. And before you know it, I was still getting my ass handed to me. Were there any other tricks I had up my sleeve that could help me? Yes, a couple actually. Assist characters and focus/focus finishers. Assist characters are characters you find along your journey who you can equip in the assist slot as if they were another piece of equipment. Each assist character has its own attack, such as Adelan's throwing knives that cause bleed and Chanlapkin's cannon. You can summon them with the press of a button, and there's cooldown between summons so you can't spam. It's a really awesome mechanic with a dual role of helping dole out DPS and making the journey not feel so lonely. Focus finishers are kinda like your super move. You build up a meter in the top left corner by attacking, getting hit, and building up combos. When the meter shines and starts sparking all over the place, you press the light attack and magic buttons to activate your focus. With focus activated, your stats and speed are temporarily increased, and you heal 25% of your HP and MP. So strategically activating focus can be the difference between victory and failure. And if you press the attack and magic buttons again while in focus, you'll pull off your focus finisher. Like stated earlier, these are super moves that can do a lot of damage as well as give you iframes during their animations. There's a bunch of focus finishers you can find throughout your journey, but I'll talk about that more in progression. Now that I fully understood the breadth of my offensive capabilities, surely I could finally defeat the ice bitch Abigail, right? Yeah, but not without life potions. These bad boys will get you through some tough times, let me tell you. They're basically Phoenix Downs from Final Fantasy that revive you after your HP hits 0 and replenish at save points. There's also an MP counterpart called Spirit Potions, but they didn't get as much use from me as the Life Potions. The only drawback to using a Life Potion is that it lowers your battle rank after defeating the boss. That's right. This game likes to keep you on your toes and treats every boss encounter like an exam. Depending on your rank, you could be given a pretty sweet reward, such as permanent stat increases. It's a great way to incentivize players to get good. So, after a lot of defeats, I was finally able to beat Abigail, the angelic piece of shit. This could only be a precursor to how difficult the rest of the game's bosses are, right? Not really. Though each boss was fun and challenging, I never had as much trouble with the rest of the game as I did with Abigail, mostly because I was so underleveled and inexperienced when I fought her. But because she pushed me to engage with Valdis Story's mechanics to their fullest, I was able to appreciate everything Valdis Story did combat-wise and actually started enjoying the game. I guess that'll finally do it for combat. As you can see, there's a lot to Valdis Story's combat that not many Metroidvanias dabbled with at the time. Skill cancels, super moves, emphasis on combos. I know Dust and Elysian Tale focused on combos a year prior, but Dust's combos aren't as technical or skillful as the combos in Valdis Story. And the only other MV I can think of off the top of my head that has similar combat to Valdis Story is Vernal Edge. If you dig Valdis Story, you should definitely give Vernal Edge a shot. But yeah, I found Valdis Story's combat a lot of fun once I fully engaged with all its mechanics. There are a lot of things to kill in this game, and lots of ways to kill them.
Abilities. Platforming.
I want to get this out of the way. I cared very little for the platforming in Valdis Story. So little that it was one of the reasons why I wanted to drop it. It just felt clunky and a little unresponsive, especially if you were near a wall. Once you have the wall jump unlocked, you'll cling and freeze to every wall you ever come near. This is incredibly frustrating when it happens during combat. And your characters have this stomp move that procs if you press down while airborne. It can be pretty handy, but sometimes during platforming, you could get flanked by flying enemies and roll your thumb in an attempt to target an enemy behind you, only to instead do a stomp right into a hole. There were a lot of design choices that I thought weren't conducive for the game's fast-paced moments. Dashing out of a skill cancel, for example. To pull that off, you have to roll your thumb on the D-pad like you're throwing a Hadouken from Street Fighter. Why not map skill canceling to a button or dashing to another button? There's plenty of buttons this game isn't using. It'd have made things faster and more convenient, and it kind of sucks having to roll your thumb constantly just to dash through the world. There's a lot of timed sequences in this game. I may not be speaking for everyone, but I hate timed stuff. I don't mind it here and there, but you're constantly on the clock in Valdis Story, literally before some updates. But I'll talk about that in the spoiler section. All throughout the world, there are magical floating stones and buttons to stomp that open doors, but only for a few seconds, forcing you to race toward these doors before they slam shut. Some of these sequences were optional, some were mandatory, all I despised. Maybe if the controls were a little tighter and the dash didn't require me to constantly roll my thumb like this was Evo, it wouldn't have been so bad. But let me tell you, between the rigidness of the wall jumps and the accidental stomps that screw up my jumps between platforms, I always dreaded these sequences. But other than the timed crap, I found the platforming to be palatable. As for the game's abilities, I found them to be quite ingenious in one way or another. Of course, you have standards like wall jumps and double jumps, and I gotta say, obtaining the double jump in this game was pretty cool. You essentially buy it from a missing crewmate you have to find, which I just wasn't expecting. You can actually go through this entire game without the double jump if you miss this crew member or don't realize he sells the move. I think that's cool, not just for its originality, but for what it meant for the game's level design. It basically meant because the game was designed to be completed without the double jump, getting the double jump absolutely broke a lot of its platforming sequences, which I'm okay with. It felt like an amazing and unorthodox reward for engaging with the world. I also found the rest of the game's utility abilities to be ingenious. I don't want to spoil all the abilities, but I'll say a majority come in the form of magic spells you need to equip, which again was something I wasn't expecting. For instance, early in the game, you'll get a spell called Ice Tower that lets you place a column of ice on the ground that you can use to jump off of, kinda like a limited yet unorthodox double jump. I don't know, allowing magic to be used in multiple ways outside of combat just made for some great world building and interesting moments. That's it for this section. I may not have been a fan of the game's odd control choices and copious timed sequences, but I still had fun after I made it over that initial learning curve. And I can't overstate how much I love the game's multifaceted utility abilities. Though the game has some tried and true staples, there's a lot of original skills here too.
Progression.
There's so much to talk about here. So much that I was confused pretty much the entire game over a lot of it, because apparently some stuff is only discussed in the game's manual and not actually in the game. So yeah, I had to look up a bunch of crap just to wrap my head around some mechanics. Let's start with something easy. Leveling. So much in this game can be leveled up, from your focus finishers to your assist characters to your actual character. To level up your assist character, all you have to do is use them, and leveling them up makes them more effective. Take Adeline. With each level, she throws more knives. Okay, that's simple. How about leveling focus finishers? Oh geez, what the f is this shit? There are stat requirements, but you also have to have had actively put stat points into a stat? So equipment and boss rank bonuses alone don't count? Why? Why is this so convoluted? Why not level up as I use it just like assist characters? Ugh, this is so dumb. Thankfully, leveling up your character is far easier to understand. You get XP by killing stuff, and once you get enough XP, you gain a level. With every level, you get a stat point and a skill point. Use your stat point to increase your luck, because why the would you use it on any other stat? Oh right, so you can level up your focus finisher. God, that is so stupid. And use your skill point to gain perks on the skill tree. Each character has 3 skill trees clearly labeled by the kind of build you want to create. It's pretty simple, and I appreciate its simplicity. My only issue with the stats is they don't do much except increase certain attributes, like HP and MP and attack and whatnot, but these increases never felt substantial. And every stat felt pointless next to luck, which is what I dumped all my stat points into. I don't understand why luck was so good in this game. Typically, luck's relegated to item rarity acquisition from enemy drops and stuff, but luck in Valdis Story increases so many stats. I could drop a stat point into strength and increase my attack by 2, or I could drop it into luck and increase my attack by 3, my HP by 8, and my MP by 4. Why wouldn't I pick luck? Granted, I know there are items that use the base stat value to calculate outcomes for offense and defense, and granted, the luck stats increases change level by level, but whatever. Luck all the way, baby! And it's not like stats influence the gear you can equip. Hey, speaking of gear, there's a surprising amount of armors and weapons you can equip. I don't have the exact numbers, but there's like 4 to 5 weapons per character and like a dozen or so armors. Each weapon comes with its own unique playstyle, drawbacks, and benefits. Take Wyatt's Seraphic Blades. They reduce his damage, but give him an entirely new and faster moveset while also giving him some hang time for aerial combat. Multiple characters with multiple weapons adds greatly to this game's replayability, which is intentional because this game was meant to be played multiple times. Let's talk about acquiring and enhancing gear. Weapons can only be crafted from certain crew members you have to find first, and armor must be found while exploring. Once you have the gear, you can craft and upgrade them to increase their level, which increases their effectiveness. Leveling up a weapon gives it more damage, and leveling up armor gives you more protection. Simple enough on paper, but endless fluff had to add some convoluted bullshit. Of course, as is the nature with crafting, you have to find the materials first. Oddly enough, there's no currency in this game. This society is instead all about crafting materials randomly dropped from enemies. Anyway, the bullshit comes in when you have to find the shops to enhance your gear. Only specific blacksmiths can upgrade specific gear. You want to enhance your angelic armor? Gotta remember where the angelic armor blacksmith lives. Want to make your demon armor better? Find the Demon Smith. It's honestly not terrible and ultimately adds to the game's world building, but having to remember which town has which smithy and then having to travel from place to place just adds up. It'd have been much more convenient to have had a central hub with all this stuff, but like I said, the way the world's shops are set up is more for world building than player convenience. I'll let you decide if that was a good move or not. The last thing of note about gear is soul affinity. This mechanic is never brought up in the game and is only explained in its digital manual. It's not a difficult mechanic to grasp, but it'd have been nice to know exactly what was going on with this meter and what the bonuses were. I'll break it down for you. There are 3 different affinities: dark, neutral, and light. And each affinity comes with bonuses. I'll throw these bonuses up on the screen. Attaining a specific soul affinity requires you to equip gear aligned with that affinity. For example, the seraphic blades I talked about earlier have a light affinity. Pair that with armor and magic with light affinity, and boom, you get all the light soul affinity bonuses. This was a really cool concept that was wasted on me because I had no idea it existed. I only discovered the digital manual after completing the game. I bet I'd have had much more fun and an easier time with the game. I'm looking directly at you, Eye of Mergado. Had I known this mechanic existed. I mean, Dark Soul Affinity gives you life drain and makes you faster. Ugh, that would have been awesome. There are some great and rewarding side quests in this game. Not a whole lot, but the ones that are there are extremely impactful. I'll save some of the bigger, life-saving side quests for the spoiler section. The only side quest I'm comfortable in discussing now is finding your lost crewmates. These seemingly random ragtag bunch of weirdos are hidden in crevices all throughout the sunken city of Scythiel. Each member you find returns to the city's library and provides some kind of service. Some become assist characters you can summon during combat, some will sell you stuff or craft you things, and others will teach you new focus finishers. These crewmates were designed by Kickstarter backers, so there's not a whole lot of cohesion to their designs. But in this rare instance, it works very well. I loved discovering each new crewmate just to see what the heck they looked like, how they acted, and how they would contribute to the team. I don't know, I just really loved this aspect of the game. That'll do it for progression. As you can see, there's a lot going on in Valdis Story to make your character stronger. Some of it is straightforward, like leveling, stat points, skill trees, crafting, and gear. But then there's a lot of awkward, unexplained stuff as well, like leveling up your focus finishers and knowing exactly what the purpose and bonuses of soul affinities were. The game and players definitely would have benefited from some sort of tutorial screen or help menu rather than a digital manual. But despite that, I loved all the things you could upgrade and enhance in Valdis Story and don't have a lot of complaints. Well, maybe a centralized hub area would have been nice.
Exploration.
Exploration in Scythiel is an interesting beast. As you run around, you'll be met with a plethora of locked doors and ability-gating obstacles like breakable walls. It's easy to see early on in your adventure that you'll need to be doing a lot of backtracking as you progress. And personally, I think all this teasing and ability teasing is an excellent quality for Metroidvanias. Gets those juices flowing in your MV brain, you know? I wish there were a way to mark up your map to help catalog where all these backtrackable points of interests are, but it's not really that big of an issue due to the world's relatively small size. Unless you're an idiot like me. I was actually having trouble finding where to use certain keys, even though the map clearly color codes areas to display where certain keys can be used. For some reason, I didn't realize this till late game. I don't know. My MV brain was malfunctioning while playing Valdis Story, I guess. Making Valdis Story's world so small was actually a really good move, and not just because it made backtracking less tedious. Valdis Story is a game that's meant to be replayed several times. Having this smaller, more intimate world makes those repeated playthroughs more palatable. My only issue is that there are points of interest like towns with merchants and the library housing the crewmates that are scattered throughout the map. There's a convenient tram system that links the towns, so that's not a problem. But getting to a library requires you to go to a specific town and then trekking through an entire biome to reach the library. It's a little annoying and could easily have been fixed with some sort of shortcut or adding a tram point directly at the library. Another slight inconvenience is that the tram doesn't allow you to choose where you want to go. You just cycle through 3 areas until you find the one you want. Not a big deal because there's only 3 areas, but still a weird design choice. But I'll take any fast travel I can get, especially in such a backtrack heavy game. I will say the backtracking in Valdis Story is mostly done for extracurricular content. There's only maybe one instance where you need to backtrack on the critical path to find a new biome. Other than that, this is a pretty linear experience, though it does provide branching paths to get to where you need to go, and there's one part where you can tackle a couple objectives in any order you want. However, this linearity descriptor is only for the critical path. There's so much optional stuff you can do along the way. This is what makes exploration in Valdis Story so intriguing. There's so many optional and missable events that motivate you to search the game's every nook and cranny. And there are some events that require you to make a decision, whether you know it's a decision or not, that'll affect future events. It's fascinating and pushes you to replay the game just to see what would happen if you did things differently. And oftentimes, Doing things differently on subsequent playthroughs rewards you with something new, which is always exciting. But there's a flip side to this coin. Because there are missable events, obviously, you might miss out on something, and that can really be frustrating to some players. Also, because certain decisions and actions lead to specific outcomes, it's impossible to do everything in a single playthrough, thus forcing players to replay the game if they want to see everything the game has to offer. Or they can just hit up YouTube, whatever. That's my biggest pet peeve in a game, not being able to experience everything in a single run. I'm not going to hold it against Valdis Story because it was explicitly designed to be replayed with its multiple characters and weapons, but I can't forgive its level cap. That's where the game's strongest form of FOMO comes from. You can only get to level 20. There's a method of reaching level 25, but regardless, even at 25, you don't get enough skill points to unlock everything on the skill trees. That may not be an issue for you, but it hurt my very soul. Sorry for the little tangent. Back to exploration. There's tons of stuff to discover that makes exploration worthwhile. Armor, additional life and spirit potions, master's scrolls to increase skill cancel usage, your missing crewmates, rare materials for crafting, and unique key items for optional side quests. Side quests are few and far between, but it's always exciting when you find one. But the coolest thing you can find are the books of the old gods. Returning these bad boys to the library nets you stat and skill points, as well as some sweet lore. And that lore changes depending on the character you're playing as. So you're definitely going to want to keep your eyes peeled. Thorough exploration also rewards you with a ton of optional biomes and bosses, and you'll love to see it. Though I would have preferred that some of these optional areas and bosses offered more than just a challenge, rank bonuses, and maybe some lore and a shortcut. I'm specifically talking about the lab biome with all the poison. That just seems so random, but it was fun enough, I guess. The only time I wasn't having fun was with the game's timed sequences. So much of the best loot in the game is locked behind these stupid mana devices. And like I said earlier, I just don't think this game's controls are tight enough for most of these demanding sequences. In the game's defense, most of these sequences are optional. However, there are some that are mandatory and require you to do them every time you re-enter an area. These moments were just obnoxious, and I hated that so much great stuff was locked behind these sequences. All in all, Valdis Story's exploration is fascinating and a little chaotic with its optional and missable content. Its smaller map creates a familiar, almost cozy world for players interested in multiple playthroughs. There's tons of things to find to improve your character and lots of secrets to discover, making your journey through Scythiel all the more rewarding. Just know that some of the best rewards are locked behind those lame time sequences. Those may not be an issue for you, but for me, I always dreaded them.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
There's a couple of aspects that immediately jump out at you while playing Valdis Story. One, its music goes hard. And two, its unique art style. Because I'm not a music theory guy, there's not much I can say about the music other than I really liked it and thought it complemented the game well, evoking moods of grandeur or tension when necessary. I also found the tracks to be pretty high quality in general, some of which surprising me completely with their uniqueness and creativity. Take this track. This just came out of nowhere and blew my mind. Valdis Story's art style appears to be pretty divisive among gamers. It's an interesting mix of low-poly 3D models against 2D backgrounds. Think something like Saga Frontier on the PSX. What makes Valdis Story's models stick out even more against their 2D environments is how the low-poly models have an additional layer painted over them. Add in how the painted layer is applied differently in each frame of the model's animation, and it creates this unique, almost stop-motion fluidity to character movements. I guess you either like it or hate it, and I thought it was pretty cool. Biome diversity is pretty scant. It's not awful, but it's not going to ignite your MV senses. On the ho-hum side of things, there are a lot of cold areas, a hot area, a few towns, and a sewer. And on the interesting end of the spectrum, you have a poison lab, a lightning place, and a ziggurat. Even the game's final biome is kind of boring environment-wise, and there's not a whole lot of cohesion to its world. A lot of the times, instead of creating some kind of seamless transition between biomes, Valdis Story just threw up a generic connector hallway or tunnel, which was not uncommon for the era. Heck, even Symphony of the Night had those awkward loading hallways. Enemy designs are pretty cool. There are 3 enemy factions, angels, demons, and ferals, and each faction was easily identifiable by their designs and colors, blue, red, and yellow, respectively. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, if you needed a lesser angel spirit for crafting, you knew what monster to rough up at a glance thanks to the color scheme. And two, It's a freaking gang war out here, man. It was always funny to see the different factions fighting each other as you were exploring. You could even lure enemies from one faction to another and watch them duke it out. It's a great combat strategy and a superb method of world building. I've heard rumblings online about how people wish there were more enemy variety, and though more enemy types are always welcome, I think games that focus heavily on brawling, such as Valdis Story, benefit more from lower enemy variety. So I found Valdis Story's amount of enemies to be fine, especially with how short the game is. My initial playthrough was like 9 hours and subsequent playthroughs were around 3 or 4. Valdis Story's narrative is something else. I'll save most of my thoughts on it for the spoiler section, but in general, its narrative is both lackluster and brilliant. Let me explain. This game has a ton of lore. I'm not saying it's on the same level as a From Software game, but Valdis Story does have its own lore section on the main menu. And although we all love us some lore, what typically keeps me and most players engaged in a story is the plot and its characters. And this game's plot is razor thin with very little conflict or tension. And its characters aren't very complex either. Truthfully, everything leading up to the game's endings is kind of dull. At most, you're going to be slightly interested in the world and some of the relationships that exist between the characters and enemies. But mostly, nothing's really going to grip your imagination until the very end of the game. And I mean the very end of the game. I'm talking like the credits. There are a couple of MacGuffins you can collect that provide extra scenes during the game's credits, and dude, the events that transpire post-game sound so freaking awesome. Like, I want to play that game. In actuality, Valdis Story Abyssal City feels like it's just a prologue to a much cooler, much more interesting and enthralling game. A game we'll probably never get. I hate to say it, but it's been over a decade and I can't find anything from Endless Fluff talking about a sequel. So that sucks, being left hanging like this, but that's how it goes in show business. You gotta leave the audience wanting more. All right, time for spoilers. Go to this timestamp to fast travel to my final thoughts.
Spoilers.
Welcome to the spoiler section, where every obscure thing is brought up and the format don't matter. Firstly, I want to talk about saving the civilians. These are the side quests I didn't want to talk about earlier. Anyway, you get ranked at the end of the game, and one of the line items they assess you with is the percentage of civilians you rescue. I was fortunate enough to have saved 100% of the civilians on my first playthrough without even looking up a guide. I was like, when the hell did I save civilians? I chalked it up to me fixing the mana heater in Ishq, but apparently everyone in Tagrum can die if you don't kill Adelan's brother, which you do in a seemingly random cutscene I stumbled upon. Everyone in Execution Hall can also die if you don't kill the Yeti boss before a certain point, which I guess I did, so yay? It's kind of cool that you can have such a huge impact on this world, but it also kind of sucks that you could lose almost every vendor in the game for basically arbitrary reasons. It's tough to tell how I really feel about it. I guess in the end, it's an oddity that I just have to respect. A little history. These mass murder events were originally tied to how long you played the game. I don't know the exact times because the wikis aren't clear, so take the times I'm about to share with a grain of salt. Anyway, if you didn't kill the optional Yeti boss in the first 2 hours of the game, he would eat everyone in the execution hall, locking you out of some great late game content. As for saving Ishq and Tagrum, I swear I heard from somewhere that you have 7 hours to kill the brother to save everyone in Tagrum, and saving everyone in Ishq needs to be done in a few hours, so says the Valdis Story wiki. Sorry I don't have exact numbers, but it doesn't matter because these timed events don't exist anymore. All timed events have been converted into triggered events, which I think is much better for Metroidvania, considering MV players tend to take their times as they explore. I'd also like to talk about the Eyes of the Goddesses. You all know I like multiple endings, so I guess you could say I'm a little disappointed Valdis Story didn't have multiple endings, especially because it had multiple characters, but this isn't entirely true. Yes, the base ending for each character is the same with changed dialogue, but you could also unlock multiple extra scenes during the credits for each character. It's these scenes I was referring to when I said the post-game sounded so freaking awesome. To unlock these scenes, you have to find and defeat secret bosses to obtain the Eyes of the Goddesses before completing the game. I genuinely thought this was an excellent idea, even though it didn't unlock a new boss or boss phase. These extra scenes were so incredible, showing the future of each character and revealing so much lore. I especially liked Wyatt's extra scenes where they practically rip off the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender's first season. Literally just renamed Jolene to Azula, for crying out loud. These scenes represent Valdis Story's most crucial hook to its fanbase: untapped potential. The entirety of Valdis Story Abyssal City is practically just a preface for a much better and interesting game. The extra scenes these Eyes of the Goddesses provide introduce awesome new characters, reveal cool twists in relationships, and provide a glimpse at a much bigger and better plot. It's a criminal shame none of what was revealed in these scenes made it into the actual game we were playing. And honestly, that's part of the charm. Without the setup that is Valdis Story Abyssal City, these scenes wouldn't have been as impactful. Frankly, what Endless Fluff did here was ingenious. It kinda parallels Berserk in a way. The Black Swordsman arc is where all the coolest and freakiest shit happens, but none of it would mean anything or be as impactful without going through the Golden Age arc first. So I ain't mad at Endless Fluff for keeping all its best story bits in the post-credits. I'm mad they ain't made a sequel yet. What else can I say? Oh, the game's final boss was super stupid. Some random feral. This game has been throwing around demonic and angelic generals and goddesses' names left and right, and in the end, you're gonna throw a giant octopus at me? Super anticlimactic and super lame. Oh, and thanks for the timed escape sequence again. They just had to throw one more of those in on me, didn't they?
Conclusion.
Valdis Story Abyssal City is a game that's reached cult status, I think, not for its innovation or gameplay, but for its cliffhanger narrative and potential for creating an unforgettable future tale. I can only imagine how captivated a gamer in their formative years would have been with this game's world, and how disappointed they've become not seeing its next chapter. Of course, there are a lot of other aspects to like about Valdis Story. Its combat, presentation and music, and its design that facilitates replayability with the use of multiple characters, multiple weapons, and a smaller, easy to digest world. And there's a lot to discover and do on each playthrough. But there are some things that hold Valdis Story back. Its rigid controls, some odd design choices like needing to roll your thumb to dash, its insistence to not allow players to experience everything, narratively and mechanically, on a single run. I'm looking at you, level cap. So much of the limitations Valdis Story imposes on itself and its players are done solely to motivate players to replay it, even to the detriment of its enjoyability. So here's the question. Would I recommend Valdis Story Abyssal City? Whew, it's a hard sell. It took me a minute to actually start enjoying it, but once I did, I was sold for the rest of the game. So if you're an MV vet, you're going to need to approach Valdis Story with patience and grace, and know that combat is at the forefront, not exploration. And you got to be comfortable with missing stuff because there are a lot of missable events and items in this game. I don't see a lot of vets being sold on its replayability, but if replayability sounds good to you, then Valdis Story might be something you dig. As for MV noobs, know that this game's boss fights can be kinda challenging. Other than that, the same caveats I gave for the vets apply to you too. Ultimately, to truly enjoy Valdis Story to its fullest requires you to go into the game with a mastery orientation. This is a game that wants you to master it. Be the fastest, get the best ranks, learn and understand every aspect of every character to ensure that you are the best. And to become the best, the game offers multiple characters with multiple weapons and multiple builds. There's an uncanny amount of player expression to motivate you to replay and become the best. If that sounds like something you're willing to do and sink time into, then Valdis Story Abyssal City is definitely the game for you. As for me, I'm not interested in mastering games anymore. I'm content with completing and savoring experiences at a standard level before moving on to the next experience. And even with this mentality, I was still able to enjoy Valdis Story. Probably not as much as I thought I would considering how requested it was, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So, you can count me among one of Valdis Story's fans. One of its many fans who will remain disappointed and depressed because Valdis Story 2 is probably never gonna happen. Feels great to be part of the Storied and Select fandom. Yay.